I have a podcast. I've had a couple different podcasts. I had an old school podcast where when I was in the sports world, I podcasted a interview show with other broadcasters. It was interesting. I got to talk to all those great voices they called play by play, but it had a limited shelf life. I moved on, did something else. I've got a podcast that's been going on now for 6 years. Brett Boone and I have a podcast. I'm the executive producer and I co-host with them. I'll host it sometimes, and we've had this podcast go on for a while. We've had huge, gigantic stars on it. Like we had Dana White the week before the UFC. We've had, I don't know how many Hall of Famers we've had on the podcast. It's a pretty good show. So I've done that podcast for a while. And now we are podcasting this show. And now we've added the 933 experiment, which means you can listen to, subscribe to the podcast, get all these segments. In case you missed something, you want to hear it again. And you can hear the 933 podcast, where it's a podcast where we actually take telephone calls live during the recording of the podcast that we have here at Richmond's Morning News. See how it all works out together. And then we put it out on YouTube, Facebook, and then we actually stream it live as well. It's going to grow. But I saw this podcast pop up the other day, and it's the RVA podcast from Richmond. It is a podcast that's hosted by Odie, and he sits down, he talks with other officials. So basically, let's just tell you, everybody and anybody started podcasts. They launch podcasts all over the place. Podcasts are pretty easy to start, just by thinking like this.
Here are 6 steps to start a podcast with your smartphone. Beginner edition. Step 1, you need to determine your show type. Is this going to be an interview-based show? Is it going to be a solo podcast? Are you going to have co-hosts or a group of friends? I'll make a full list in the future.
And that's what I kind of thought when I saw all these new podcasts pop up. Ted Cruz has a podcast. Dan Crenshaw has, everybody and their brother wants to have a podcast. I guess basically, Super Dave, everybody wants to be Rich Herrera, their own radio show. They can't have a radio show, so they're going to do their own podcast. I'm going to start a podcast.
Well, there's so many out there. It's almost become like iTunes when it first started, where there's some really, really good podcasts out there, and then there's about 95% that are just terrible.
Well, Boone and I laugh that we make it look pretty easy because I take my years of broadcast experience. I bring him in as the ball player, and we've had probably maybe 4 or 5 dozen former athletes like, Brett, I watch your podcast. Looks pretty easy. I think I could do this. What do you do? And we've had major amounts of major famous baseball players, football players that have actually commented, yeah, I saw Boone's podcast. I could do that. Jumped in, found out that it's work, found out that it's more than just turning on a mic, and their podcast lasts about a month and a half before they quit.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, all the time. So the RTD is producing a podcast that the city's paying the newspaper to promote and to produce for them. Graham Moore of the Richmonder.org has a question. Is that a conflict of interest? What kind of coverage are they going to get from their broadcast or their podcast partners at the newspaper? But to me, it brings up this bigger story. What are the priorities for the city of Richmond? Is it creating a podcast and all this goodwill, or is it fixing things that we've known have forever, way before Danny Avula decided to run for mayor? The Richmond City Hall has so much waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption that it's overwhelming. One of the things he wanted to do was make it more transparent. Does this make it more transparent, or is this more self-serving and patting yourself on the back? And that's what Grant Mumai asked at the Richmonder.org. So let me ask you a question. If the city has a lot of time and bandwidth, is producing their own podcast to tell everybody all the great stuff they're doing, is that really what their priority should be? And I thought about this when I saw it, and I wanted to bring it up on the show today. Is this an indictment on the media? Do you trust the media anymore? Do you really trust the media anymore, or should newsmakers, politicians just go out and start their own podcast because they don't think they're getting a fair shake from the media anymore? So who would you trust more? is what I'm going to get to right now. I've got on one hand the traditional mainstream media. Do you trust them anymore? Have we lost faith that they're going to cover stories down the middle when you're a reporter? I'm not a reporter. I'm not a journalist. I never claimed to be one. I'm a talk show host. But if you're a reporter and you're sitting there covering as your beat City Hall, Capitol Square, do I trust them to give me the facts and let me make my own decision of what's going on within the City Hall or Capitol Square? Or would you trust somebody producing their own podcast, giving their own spin on things? Think about that. Do we still have a trust in the media? I will tell you this, yesterday being at Capitol Square, I saw a couple questions were asked, 100% asked to frame their own agenda and point of view, not the facts, their own agenda, point of view. I'll play a couple of those for you later. But do I trust someone who's a politician or a government official or someone you cover to give you the whole story and not being asked uncomfortable, tough questions so you really find out what's going on? Dave, back in my former life, there was something called the Players Tribune. I think Derek Jeter started. Do you remember that?
I remember the name.
So it was a website where players would write their own stories of what's going on with them, their lives, their team, and they would just talk to the fans directly. Okay. I'm not going to go through the media. I'm not going to go through the lens of the writers. I'm just going to give it to you straight. Well, I will tell you this as someone who's spent my career putting my microphone and asking questions of people, that I don't know if that's necessarily on the up and up, because are you really going to tell me what's going on? Or are you going to tell me what you want me to know what's going on? Well, will you ask yourself that tough question? Why did you boot that ball in the second inning? What happened? You struck out with the bases loaded, missed the take sign, swung and missed, and hit into a double play. You were late for the game today and got benched. Will you address that honestly and openly on your own, or does somebody need to ask you that question so we can probe to find out what really went on? And that's just the sports. Now take that over to politics. Take that over to politics and what's going on at City Hall. Do you trust city leaders in Richmond to ask themselves the same questions that I would ask you as someone who's trying to figure out what's going on? Or do you think the media is so biased right now, no matter whether it's left-wing media, right-wing media, or the media is the mainstream, can you trust them anymore? And that's, I think, one of the biggest issues we have in America is people have lost faith and trust in a lot of our institutions, media included. Comment for me, 833-804-1140, 833-804-1140. City starting their own podcast. Good idea, bad idea. Would you trust it? Would you listen to it? Or do you still want the media asking questions and not City Hall asking questions of themselves? 833-804-1140. You care to comment on the James River Air text line? How many people trust politicians? That's what I thought. That's what I thought. Again, your comments, 833-804-1140, James River Air text line. Today's program brought to you in part by Loan Pronto. Okay. That's that feeling, it's that sound you make when it's time to pay bills.